Hey internets, so I thought I would end the year with a nice little video on Whitepills, or in other words, ending the holidays on a good note, by going over some of the wins of the year, because hey, clown world can be kinda depressing at times. And as we're heading into 2024, I figured we'd have a break by just looking at what went well in 2023. I'm going to keep this short and jump right into it. The first of these Whitepills is that trust in both the media and the government is at an all-time historic low. And some people might be wondering, well, wait a minute, is people not trusting the government and not trusting the media really a white pill? Yes. Yes, it absolutely is. As I have gone over several times before on my channel, the evidence that the corporate media and the state are in bed with each other to gaslight the public with nonsensical propaganda and really low quality, obvious distractions from the real issues is overwhelming and obvious to anyone who does even the slightest amount of online research. So it is absolutely a good thing that more and more people are waking up to their game. Your average cable TV media broadcast days, it's not even news anymore. It's just some overpaid, mid-witted sophist taking data out of context to push whatever the current narrative is. It's an absolute joke, and everyone with basic common sense can see it. The next white pill that kinda goes hand in hand with people losing trust in mainstream media is that BreadTube, as it turns out, is dying. Just to look at some of the major BreadTuber subscriber stats in comparison to other people's subscribers throughout the last year has shown them pretty much all to be on a very noticeable downward trend. You see, as it turns out, a political strategy of blame everything on capitalism doesn't really work out too well in the long run. The simplest way to explain the free market at the end of the day is really just voluntary trade and exchange. So the only way to sit back and blame that for everything is to really blame a whole bunch of stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with capitalism on capitalism. For example, blaming lobbying in the revolving door scenario on capitalism. Yeah, sure, that makes perfect sense. Capitalism is when government bribes. Capitalism is when government does stuff. Their takes are utterly ridiculous to anyone who's actually studied multiple schools of economic thought, especially if you know both Austrian economics and you've also studied some Chicago school economics. BreadTube's takes are just so disconnected from reality. And that's not even getting started on their terrible social takes and their epistemology regarding looking at anything they disagree with, which can be effectively be summarized as everything I don't like is literally a newtsy. It's stupid, it's predictable, and people are just getting tired of it. Seriously now, you could probably simulate a lot of BreadTube video essays in ChatGPT these days. Just go to ChatGPT and say, hey ChatGPT, I want you to give a 5-paragraph essay on why insert problem here is the fault of capitalism, based on serious misunderstandings of economics from over 100 years ago, while including various snide remarks and implications that everyone who disagrees is a racist. And I guarantee you that whatever ChatGPT spits out is probably going to be pretty close to whatever the latest BreadTube schlop happens to be. It's gotten so bad that even I'm getting bored of refuting them sometimes because a lot of them just kind of regurgitate and copy off of each other. So I'll just move on to the next white pill, which is actually a big one. So, as it turns out, misandry, as a culturally acceptable standard that we are all just supposed to sort of accept, despite how stupid and hypocritical it is, happens to finally be nearing its end. There is a legendary blog post, in case you haven't heard of it, from the futurist titled The Misandry Bubble that gets a lot of attention, and it brilliantly ties much of Western decline to the needless acceptance of misandry and a culture which discourages the existence of strong male figures, and that this has led to poor infrastructure and an increased acceptance of socialism, as people foolishly look towards the state to fill the void of where good men once stood. Needless to say, this hasn't exactly been working out for the West too well. The main prediction of the misandry bubble is that we would eventually reach the point where the public at large is forced to accept how absurd and stupid this trend is, because society needs strong men in order for it to be a sustainable society that actually has a chance of living, longer than a few generations. And a big turning point was probably the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, where the West was basically forced to finally acknowledge the obvious fact that not every woman who claims to be a victim is in fact a victim, and thus the brain-dead mindset of listen and believe for women and guilty until proven innocent for men is, well, freaking brain dead. And over the course of the last year, I've noticed more and more the lies of modern feminism are seeping into a spot where it is firmly within the Overton window to call them out as lies. We can probably expect to see this misguided acceptance of misandry crumbling away more and more in the near future. And while things are unfortunately still pretty bad in this regard, and we are not out of the woods yet at all, a big indicator was the fall of Jezebel. While misandry is still commonly pushed by prestige-seeking cathedral-like grifters, it shows that, at the very least, the profitability of misandry is falling at a rate similar to people's trust in the government and media. So in other words, misandry is already starting to run into the economic reality, the fact that it just doesn't pay long term to hate on men. So again, expect to see more wins in this direction in the coming years. A big indicator of this can be seen in BreadTube, specifically Voosh. One thing Voosh is very good at as an optics cuck is recognizing trends in said Overton window. He recently made a video calling out how stupid it is to shame straight men for finding women attractive. And while he dishonestly tried to frame this as something primarily coming from the right, spoiler alert, it's not. The fact that this happened just further proves that cultural acceptance of shaming men for no particular reason whatsoever is on a downward trend. So don't be surprised if by 2030, BreadTube starts trying to gaslight people into thinking that third wave feminism was a right-wing movement. So now to move on to the next white pill. Speaking of the Overton window, it is now perfectly within the Overton window to finally call out the utter stupidity that is the anti-racism scam. Yeah, see, as it turns out, simply calling yourself the anti-bad guy squad doesn't actually automatically mean you're the anti-bad guys. This is especially true for the anti-racism ideology, which has absolutely nothing to do with being against racism. That is in fact one of the ways of thinking in the world that is currently one of the biggest perpetrators of racism. And anti-racism just so happens to be another grift in the very, very long line of similar grifts where intellectually dishonest people equivocate on definitions until black is white and up is down and night is day and evil is good, until the normies finally catch on to the scam. Anyways, what led to this entering the Overton window recently is actually the far left's recent string of anti-Semitic remarks and the support for Hamas violence on many elite college campuses. And this inevitable conclusion really shouldn't surprise anyone who's thought about these subjects at length. You see, since the far left is racially prejudiced against white people, and they also consider Jews to be white, it was really only a matter of time before these two pieces of the puzzle would be joined together. Yep, the only real difference between deranged CRT rhetoric and scapegoating Jews is that CRT scapegoats all white people, including the Jews. And a lot of people in various Jewish communities are now finally seeing the reality of this. And there was a recent article in the Wall Street Journal that outlined this pretty simply, on how anti-racism leads to anti-Semitism, or how blaming people who are successful for all problems eventually leads to false beliefs of victimhood, which again isn't surprising because anti-racist rhetoric relies entirely on the equity fallacy or assuming that all disparity is discrimination, which is a very stupid, very demonstrably false belief. And while it is unfortunate that it had to reach the extreme point of anti-Semitism for our pseudo-intellectual decadent elites to finally pull their collective heads out of their collective arses to realize that their blind support for anti-racist rhetoric is in fact a really bad idea and a terrible ideology filled with lots of self-contradictions, and that it will ultimately, and really has, led to more racial prejudice and scapegoating rather than a reduction of it. Hey, progress is progress. It's good to see more people in high places finally being forced to take a step back and going, hey, wait a minute, this ideology is not what it claims to be. The reality is that CRT schlop ultimately relies on collective guilt in order for its ideas to function. And if you believe in collective guilt for one group, you ultimately believe in collective guilt for all groups. Any pathetic attempt at collective guilt for thee but not for me is ultimately doomed to fail. The last white pill here is that people are very much aware of the Democrats weaponizing the DOJ in an attempt to move the election in their favor. There have been a ton of media articles arguing back and forth on whether or not the accusations against Trump are valid, and whether or not states like Colorado and Maine trying to remove him from the ballot is justified. And the reality, of course, is that trying to hold your political opponents as guilty of a crime for proven innocent in order to remove them from an election is a blatantly obvious corrupt power ploy, and any remotely intelligent person can see it. It doesn't matter how much you hate Trump. You have to be completely insane to not notice how bad this is. And how I know that people aren't buying this crap is pretty much reflected in RCP's polling average in the general election matchups, which show Biden losing against all three GOP frontrunners, including Trump. People do not like Biden. People know that his administration is wrought with corruption and hypocrisy. This is further reflected in a recent Gallup poll showing increased support for third parties, which has risen by over 60%. And people's trust in the criminal justice system has plummeted under Biden to some of the worst numbers a president has seen in over 30 years. The TLDR of it is that while things may seem pretty bleak at times, the truth of things has a funny way of eventually managing to get out. Or as some of the memes like to say, in the midst of it's so over, I found there was within me an invincible we're so back. So I hope you all had a Merry Christmas, and I wish you all a Happy New Year. Thanks for watching. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Till next time.